Can we actually build a city on the moon? Not in sci-fi movies, but in real life, with real people, living off Earth. Before I tell you what it would take, and whether it's even possible, make sure to subscribe, because space is no longer the final frontier. It might be our next home. The idea of building a city on the moon has been around since the 1960s, when the Apollo astronauts first set foot on the lunar surface. But it wasn't until recently that scientists have begun to take this idea seriously. With the help of new technologies, they're now able to calculate just how much it would cost to build a city on the moon and what kind of challenges the settlers would face. The results are surprising. According to a report by the Space Development Corporation, it would only cost about $234 billion to make this dream come true. This is based on current estimates for the cost of launching payloads into space and the amount of material that would be needed to build a city on the moon. So the question isn't so much, can we afford to build a city on the moon, but should we? One of the biggest challenges facing any lunar city would be the lack of atmosphere. The moon doesn't have a significant atmosphere like Earth does, which means that there would be no air to breathe, no protection from solar radiation, and no pressure to keep water from boiling or our blood from freezing. If we want to build a city on the moon, we need to bring all of these things with us. This would require a massive amount of resources and energy, but it's not impossible. In fact, there are companies already working on ways to extract resources from the moon itself. For example, one company is developing a process to extract water from lunar regolith or soil. Water could then be used for drinking, agriculture, and even oxygen production. Other companies are looking at ways to use the moon's abundant resources of helium-3, a potential fuel source for future nuclear fusion reactors. Of course, building a city on the moon would also come with many challenges. The most obvious is the lack of gravity. The moon's gravity is only about 1/6 of Earth's gravity. This would make it difficult to walk, since we'd be taking much bigger steps than usual. And it would also make it difficult to transport goods and materials around the city. We would need to develop new technologies and ways of doing things to be able to function in such a low-gravity environment. Another challenge is the distance from Earth. The moon is about 238,000 miles away from Earth. That's about a 3-day journey by spacecraft. This means that if something goes wrong in the city, we wouldn't be able to get there quickly to fix it. It also means that communication between Earth and the moon would be delayed by several minutes. This could make it difficult to coordinate with people back home if we need help. Despite all these challenges, scientists are still optimistic about the possibility of building a city on the moon. With careful planning and the use of new technologies, we may be able to overcome these obstacles and create the first true off-world settlement. Here's what we've learned from other communities that have had to adapt to extreme environments. Here on Earth, there are a few small towns that exist in conditions that would be considered extreme by most people. These towns can teach us a lot about what it would take to build a city on the moon. For example, there are towns in the desert that have had to learn to conserve water and build structures that can withstand high temperatures. There are also towns in cold climates that have had to develop ways to provide heat and light during long periods of darkness. By studying how these towns have adapted to their environments, we can start to figure out how we might be able to do the same thing on the moon. There are also a number of ethical considerations that we need to take into account. For example, who would be allowed to live in the city, and what would happen to the native population of the moon, if there is one? These are important questions that we need to answer before we can even begin to build a city on the moon. But let's imagine that we've taken all of these factors into account, and we're ready to start planning our lunar city. What would it look like? One possibility is that we would build a series of domes that could house large numbers of people. Domes are a good choice for this, because they're very strong and can withstand high winds and other extreme weather conditions. They could also be built from materials that are lightweight yet strong, such as Kevlar or fiberglass. This would reduce the amount of material that needs to be transported from Earth, which in turn would reduce the overall cost of the project. Another possibility is that we would build the city underground in the layer of regolith or soil on the moon's surface. This would provide protection from both the sun and the cold lunar nights. We could also use the moon's own resources to build the city walls and other structures. For example, we could use the abundant supply of silica on the moon to create glass for windows and other uses. As for how we would transport people and goods around the city, we could use a variety of methods. Electric vehicles or EVs would likely be a good option as they produce no emissions and so wouldn't pollute the thin atmosphere of the moon. We could also use autonomous vehicles or AVs, which would reduce the need for human drivers. In fact, AVs are already being tested on Earth and have shown to be very safe and reliable. So they would be a good option for the moon as well. Of course, there are also other forms of transportation that we could use, such as bikes or even public transportation like buses. What's important is that we choose methods of transportation that are sustainable and don't pollute the environment. Another consideration is how we would generate power for the city. Solar power would be a good option, but we would need to use highly efficient panels that could convert as much sunlight into electricity as possible. Nuclear power is another possibility, but we would need to use a type of reactor that was safe and didn't produce long-lived radioactive waste. So it is possible to build a city on the moon. It would take a lot of planning and preparation, but it can be done. The key is to start thinking about it now so that we can start taking the necessary steps to make it a reality. With careful planning, we can build a city on the moon that is sustainable, livable, and economically viable. Do you think that building a city on the moon is a good idea? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more fun science and technology videos. Thanks for watching.